The dynamic is obviously changing in the Middle East. First, the United Arab Emirates, then Bahrain. And according to some world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, there might be more. But taking a deeper look into the media and public reaction might paint a little bit of a different picture. So let's open our eyes and get a global perspective of what the new Middle East looks like on the ground, at least according to the Arab world. Noam Bannett is a lecturer and analyst on the Middle East and the Arab world, specializing in political cartoons. Thanks, Noam, for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to start with the normalization deals. You know, there was a lot of talk that we were going to see a peace deal between Israel and Sudan following those other two that I mentioned. So far, that has not happened. These cartoons that you've showed me seem like they're showing some sign of a lifeline for Sudan. Is that true?
The situation in Sudan is very interesting. Sudan is in a very bad situation because, in the one hand, they want the international community to change their their approach. Of course, especially Israel, especially the United States. But they're also divided between themselves. So there's a part of them that want, of course, the normalization with Israel to get out of the list of countries that support terrorism and get economic, help. But some of them still see Israel as a problem. So because they're divided, we can hear voices from this side and this side.
Really interesting. Many see these deals as a sort of affront against Iran. So how are we seeing that illustrated in the cartoons from this week from the Arab world?
So we have a very interesting cartoon from Carlos Latouf. He's a very known BDS activist. We see how the whole story that we hear about the normalization is to isolate Iran. I have to mention that most of the cartoons that I see, they're talking about the countries themselves. They're criticizing Bahrain and the Emirates of abandoning the Palestinians, or cartoons from Emirates or Bahrain talking against the countries that are criticizing them. For example, cartoon against Turkey or against Qatar that are usually criticizing, and they're against the normalization.
I just want to talk specifically about the cartoon we were just looking at. You know, it shows a leader from the UAE, from Bahrain, and from Israel riding on a rocket that's headed towards Iran. If you could just explain the significance of what's going on here.
First of all, we can see, of course, Uncle Sam as the United States with a big missile to Iran. We see an Israeli and two Arabs, and we see that they write from Bahrain and from UAE, that we can see how this is a big deal from the United States, reminds us who is in charge of the deal. You know, many in Israel, and some of them are right, of course, mentioning Netanyahu as the one who is really moving this deal. But of course, this cartoon mentioned in a bad way, Uncle Sam. And as we see, the destination of the missile is to Iran.
All right, there's, obviously another side that we have to touch on, which is the reaction coming from the Palestinians. This week was the anniversary of the second Intifada, and of course there's many cartoons regarding that Intifada. But one that really stood out to me this week was one of a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew praying together. And it seems like coronavirus walks into the room to sort of disrupt their prayer, or I'm not sure what's really going on here. So why don't you explain for us, what is the situation in this cartoon?
Okay, so the last cartoon that we saw is a cartoon that came from Gaza. It, of course, refers to how we all put aside the religious wars in favor for prayer. And the reason is, of course, the coronavirus. We see the three fight in the upper part of it, and the lower part, we see how everybody is praying for their God to help them from the coronavirus. You spoke about the 20 years of the Intifada and how the Palestinians see the situation. You know that yesterday marked 20 years since the blood libel of the boy called Muhammad Adora. There's a very famous incident when we see him and his father. And it took the state of Israel a long time to prove that the IDF wasn't in charge, or they didn't kill the child. And, it's very interesting how we see in the cartoons and also off the cartoons and the diplomacy path, where were the Palestinians in October 20,
right,
in the beginning of the Intifada al-Aqsa, and where are they now feeling so abandoned from their
right.
brothers from the Arab world?
Right. Obviously, a lot to take away from these cartoons. And just going back to that COVID-19 cartoon that we took a look at, although, it's sending all of us into isolation, obviously, somehow, it's bringing people in the world together. So Noam Bannett, thank you, as always, for all your insight.
Thank you very much.